Will you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, God of the cool gray sky, God of the soft summer breeze, we give you thanks for our time together in this place. We give you thanks for the ability to transcend distance, to be together in this moment. And in our time this day, may we discern what it might mean to be intentional in the idea of rest, to go beyond rest and encounter Sabbath. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So as I noted in the Storyfall Ages, during our last kids' church of the year, we talked about rest. And we talked about a lot of things beyond rest, being very honest. Did God make all the planets? Why did some animals get names? What do names even mean? Who's the old guy with a beard parting the water? Yes, we talked about a lot of things, but we started with rest. And our conversation was similar to what we just had in Storyfall Ages. Their answers were pretty similar to what you all shared too. I will tell you that my own understanding and sense of Sabbath has been shaped by the experiences of those around me. So I will tell you a story today. Some of you may know that while I was in divinity school, I was a very, 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 very low-level administrator at Harvard College. I was responsible for supervision and oversight of a residential area, while also serving as an academic advisor for about 12 to 15 first-year students. Now, this particular story takes place in the first fall semester of COVID. Like almost every institution, the vast majority of activities were held virtually. In the college's case, however, a very small number of students were allowed to come back and live on campus due to a set of criteria that included stability of home life, access to internet, time zone differences, and other standards that sought to objectively determine who could be most at risk of falling behind in their studies if they weren't physically on the campus in Cambridge. So, all that to say, my building, which normally held about 80 to 120 students, ended up holding just 14. And the second week of the semester, the student that this story is about asked to meet about something really, really important. And if you know anything about higher education, when a student says they want to tell you something important, some guardrails have to go up, right? Because they could share anything, and some things you are legally required to tell a lot of people about. So when they said this, I thought, I'm always happy to chat, but also, if it's about any of these things, think twice before you tell me. In this case, they wanted to talk about religion, because they knew that I was studying religion, and I said, this will be easy, let's do it. But what they shared was their need to observe the Sabbath. They had grown up in California, they were a very small Jewish population, and this was their first time being in an area that had a lot of Jewish people. They wanted for the first time to really observe Sabbath, the way that they've been taught and told they should observe it. And you might think this would be really, really easy to do, but it's not. You might be familiar with the idea that for observant Jews, they are generally told they should not engage in any kind of work that would create something. And so this often means not to use an oven or a stove. Some folks, it means they don't turn on a light switch because that creates energy that makes the electricity move, right? It's easy in the past to avoid a lot of that. It's much harder, and at this point, early fall 2020, to make that happen. It's extended. This idea of Sabbath still exists amid and among a very different way of living in the world. And so in this case, in order to access your residence hall, you have to swipe an ID on an electric box. If you're observing the Sabbath, you can't really do that and still be observing the Sabbath as you've been taught to do. To flush a toilet or operate a sink, you have to make some movement in front of a sensor. Also electricity at use there. So kind of hard to live your life in 2024 if you were trying to observe the Sabbath. It's going to be a bit difficult to do. All of that violated the Sabbath for this student. So what did we do? I met with my dean, and he met with physical plant and a few other folks in residential life, and within a week, we had a plan, because the Sabbath has a clear timeline. So we said by next week, you will be able to observe the Sabbath as you've been called to do. a physical lock was installed on the door of the residence hall, and the student was given a physical key. The fancy automatic toilet was uninstalled and exchanged for one that flushes manually. The same was done with the sink. And all of this was already on top of an already robust kosher meal service that allowed students to pick up meals Friday at lunchtime, take them back to their suite, and not have to use a microwave or oven to heat anything up. It would be shelf-stable throughout the duration of Sabbath. I tell you this story because I think it illustrates the reality of Sabbath. I tried to keep the story short, so I skipped a number of conversations that had to take place for all of that work to happen so quickly. All the emails and meetings, the physical labor that went into making this work, and the courage of my student to do and be something different from the world that conditioned or otherwise ordained them to be. I tell you this too, I think, because the story of the student illustrates that Sabbath is not just a nap. It's not just a break. There was a lot of intentionality behind what happened here. The student had to, one, recognize, this is not the way Sabbath is supposed to be for me. I shouldn't be doing any of these things that currently are taking place. Had to then meet with me to talk about it. I had to talk to other people to figure out some plan to make a change. And all that went into then providing and creating space so that then they could practice and observe the Sabbath. It's not just rest. It's not just a break. It's not just reading a book or relaxing on the beach. Those are all fun things to do, but there might be some difference there. Because I think that it's an intentional period of rejuvenation of our mind, body, heart, soul, and spirit in preparation of ourselves for service to God and the kingdom to come. I think Sabbath is also a ripple effect. You can see it in the story that I told, where it signals to the world that even though you called this place home, you were ultimately called to reside in some place a little different than this, a little higher than this. Sabbath is a rejection of the demands of our time and labor. Sabbath is the break. It's the place where the God of culture and commodity, I think, kneels before the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of life and love. Sabbath is a choice that we get to make about how we choose to be in this world. Sabbath is subversive. Sabbath is scandalous. Think back to our Easter story where I talked about the idea of Jesus existing as part of scandal. Sabbath is scandal too. The same thing happened in our text today because the Pharisees offered their interpretation of what the Sabbath should be or could be, and Jesus said, okay, I'm not doing that actually. And his interpretation, his acts, his decision to heal in the temple during the Sabbath was scandalous. He violated social norms. He also embarrassed those who had generally been seen to know all the things that they were talking about. In the same way that I think the story of resurrection is a stumbling block, an ancient scandal, I think too that the practice of Sabbath is another stumbling block, another type of scandal for our society. This reality, coupled with Jesus and his decision to heal, was so significant that the Pharisees began their plot to kill Jesus. Imagine that. The act of healing someone on the day of Sabbath was so harmful to the standing order of things that folks already decided that Jesus should die for that act. That is wild to me. But it also encourages me about the reality that I think, particularly in 2024 and beyond, we need to reclaim what Sabbath really is. Because again, Sabbath is not just a nap. It's not a self-care day. It's a big thing for folks my age where we call it like a day of rotting now. It's not rotting either. You guys are with me. Yes, it's also more than rotting. It's more than just a day in bed. Sabbath has intention behind it. It's a moment where we are saying to ourselves that we have a choice to live differently than society demands we live this life. It's a moment where we, I think, get to commit ourselves to saying, the labor I do right now, it's important because in the world in which we live, I have to have food and shelter. I want to have relationships. And at the same time, the real work that lies ahead is the work of kingdom building, the work of building a more just world for all. And to do that kind of work, I can't just take a nap to be ready for it. To do that kind of work, I have to have some intention behind what it is that I've been called to do. And I say this, I'm a minister. This is a bit hard for me because I think a lot of my work is around the idea of inspiring and helping others to find their path to doing the work that God calls them to do. So how does a minister practice Sabbath? I know it still bothers some folks, but I'm very big about the idea that Friday is my day off. And it is, in fact, my Sabbath day. And I take that day intentionally so that then when I walk in on Sunday and throughout the rest of the week, I can fully commit myself, devote myself to that which God has called me to do. And it's hard because it's just a day, right? And yet if we have intention behind what we're doing, if we have a real focus and purpose behind why we want to live this way, it makes that next set of tasks and work and conversations so much easier to do. I encourage you to think about what that might mean because many of you are retired and you've shared with me how hard it is in your retirement to figure out what you're doing. And some of you, I think, have stepped into a place where you are doing a lot more than you otherwise imagined you'd be doing at this time period in your life because you're trying to fill in space. And I want to encourage you in particular to just step back for some time. Take some intention, a moment of intention, to think about what it is that you think you might be called to do in this season of life. And do all the things that you fill your calendar with help you do that? Or do they draw you away from that new call? And if the latter is true, I encourage you to think about establishing a Sabbath practice. There are many ways to do this. There are tools to do this. Reverend Liz or I would be happy to talk with you about how to make that work because it's deeply, deeply important that all of us, no matter what stage of life that we are in, that we take the time to intentionally, again, create space for us to rejuvenate ourselves in preparation for the real work that lies ahead. The work of sowing peace where there is strife, of showing love and justice where it does not currently reign, the work of building a more just world for all. Again, not an easy task. You have to have a lot of strength and fortitude, resilience, passion and compassion to make that work. And so if Sabbath is just a nap, if Sabbath is just a slight break, then we are not going to be ready to do the work that lies ahead. But if Sabbath is something deeper than that, if Sabbath is having the willingness to create a scandal, the willingness to embarrass some folks in pursuit of showing right where there is currently a lot of wrong, if Sabbath is doing those things, then perhaps we will then be ready to do the great work that lies ahead. Perhaps we will be ready to do the work of kingdom building because we've taken the time to step back and pause and allow ourselves, our hearts, minds, and imaginations to be open to that which God has called us to do, and we've opened ourselves up to fully separating from what the world has called us to do. It may be hard, but there is something distinct there. Our world will work you to death. Many of you may know that, maybe why you're happy in retirement. Our world will push you and push you and push you again, and when you think you've done enough, it will say, don't forget that. There's that whole other list of things to do. Sabbath is a chance to step away from that. It's a real, genuine break, a chance to say, I see all that's there, and it can wait, because this work, the real work, cannot. And if I am going to actually live out my call and be a part of God's world, be a part of the divine community, I have to focus on that other set of tasks first. And so I step away from what the world wants and turn towards what God might want instead. That, I think, is Sabbath. And as we see in our story today, it might indeed, as we saw with Jesus, it may mean that folks are very mad at you. They might call for some sort of penalty or punishment because you've chosen to defy the way in which the world otherwise calls you to be. I think that that is okay. It's not going to be easy. I'm not going to stand here and lie to you because that would not be fair. It won't be easy. It will be hard, but it will be right and good and just. So my prayer for us this day is that we might all find some way and some place to reestablish the idea of Sabbath in our lives, to go beyond the idea of taking a nap or taking a day of rest and go deeper into a real season of intention behind that which God has called us to do, to prepare ourselves again, heart, mind, body, soul, and spirit, to do that real work for today, tomorrow, and all the days that might come ahead. May this prayer be so. Amen.